It's been an eventful 2 days here as the NFL playoffs are upon us, but five organizations have made changes at head coach or at general manager. The Chicago Bears have fired head coach Matt Nagy and GM Ryan Pace. Minnesota Vikings fired head coach Mike Zimmer and general manager Rick Spielman. New York Giants general manager Dave Gettleman retired on Sunday. The Denver Broncos fired head coach Vic Fangio. And maybe the biggest surprise of them all, the Miami Dolphins fired head coach Brian Flores on Monday. That's after Brian Flores really turned around the Dolphins season this year. They went 9-8 in 2021, 10-6 in 2020. He was 24-25 as a head coach in 3 seasons with the Dolphins. But there was always a lot of turmoil when Brian Flores was head coach of the Dolphins, and that might explain why they made the change. There was always a lot of turnover on the roster, even though players generally, especially on the defensive side of the ball, really liked Brian Flores. But also, he went through 4 different offensive line coaches in just 3 seasons and 4 different offensive coordinators in 3 seasons as well. So always just a lot of turnover all over the roster and the coaching staff in Miami. Ari, what more can you tell us about the power struggle and the structure of that organization in Miami?
Yeah, it definitely felt surprising. But I think all three of us have heard rumblings over these last few weeks that something was going on in Miami and something could happen. But we felt like, hey, they're on this big winning streak. They had the 7th seed at one point. Yeah, they're all going to be safe. But, that didn't happen. And really, during Miami's 7-game winning streak, there was a lot of talk that the coaching staff in Miami, especially the offensive staff, were not getting along. There was a lot of finger pointing going on with the offensive staff, said one source at the time. And really, as you mentioned, Doug, 4 different offensive coordinators, including this year where they had co-offensive coordinators, which is something very rare in football, and 4 different offensive line coaches as well, keep on bringing different people in. And, the thing about Miami is that Stephen Ross, their owner, isn't in the building every day. He works out of New York, so he's not there for the day-to-day of what goes on in the organization. And the person who's basically in his ear telling him what's going on is general manager Chris Grier. And Chris Grier has been in the organization for over 20 years. So with the struggle going on between Grier and Flores, the guy who ends up winning is Grier, and he's the one who ends up staying. Now, Flores is a really good head coach. He might not be for everyone. He is very tough, but he's proven as someone who's been able to win. The last 2 years, they've had winning records. This year, we saw them win 8 out of their last 9 games here to finish the year. So it wasn't an X's and O's decision, but it was more that there was some friction there. And owner Stephen Ross believed that this is something that cannot be fixed. And now it's going to be up to Ross and GM Chris Grier to find somebody else to replace Flores, who is going to be very coveted around this cycle.
Heading over to the NFC, Brad, what can you tell us about what's going on in the NFC North with the Chicago Bears and Minnesota Vikings?
Yeah, so I can tell you before the two roller coasters that occurred in Las Vegas and Jacksonville, I would say these 2 spots, both for head coach and GM in Chicago and Minnesota, were spots that people around the league were keeping an eye on. Something of a win now mandate in both buildings, and obviously neither team is playing in the playoffs. So not super surprising that our morning started off with the news there that all 4 of those gentlemen are on the way out. I can tell you for the Chicago Bears, this process has been underway for a while now. Owner George McCaskey did admit in his press conference today that he has consulted with Bill Polian, former Bills and Colts general manager, won a Super Bowl with the Colts, went to 4 Super Bowls in Buffalo. So a storied general manager. He has been working with him to identify candidates and to kind of restructure this organization. So far, you would imagine that candidates in Buffalo and Indianapolis, for those reasons, would stand out. And we know that defensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, Leslie Frazier, has received an interview, as has director of college scouting in Indianapolis, Morocco Brown. I would say keep an eye on as well Ed Dodds, the assistant general manager with the Indianapolis Colts. Also keep an eye on Brian Gain with the Buffalo Bills. Former Houston Texans general manager, is now a senior assistant with the Buffalo Bills. And I would keep an eye on Brian Daboll, the offensive coordinator with the Buffalo Bills as well. And Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator with the Indianapolis Colts. As for outside of those 2 buildings, I think Jeff Ireland with the New Orleans Saints, their assistant general manager, is another name to keep an eye on.
Is there a wild card head coaching candidate that you would look out for at either one of those spots?
So for whatever reason, there are a lot of rumblings and of Lane Kiffin, the head coach at Ole Miss, who did coach for the Raiders a long time ago now, but has NFL experience. Of course, his dad, Monty Kiffin, one of the greatest defensive coaches and defensive minds in the history of football. There has been a lot of conversation there Ole Miss lost their defensive coordinator and their GM at Ole Miss to other opportunities this offseason. And folks have suggested that Lane Kiffin is struggling to compete in the obviously daunting SEC West, has to deal with the transfer portal, which he has lamented in press conferences this year, and that he might be a legitimate candidate in Minnesota.
I mentioned earlier that Dave Gettleman retired in New York. The status of Joe Judge still up in the air at this point when we are recording this. But just one name to look out for the general manager perch for the Giants would be their current assistant GM and VP of player operations, Kevin Abrams. He actually picked up some additional responsibilities this season when it looked like Gettleman probably would be on his way out, not returning in 2022. But with the way that the Giants season ended, certainly would not be surprising if they took some of those external candidates very seriously as well. But the status of Joe Judge kind of throws everything in a loop as we speak right now.